It started with flickering lights in aisle 14. Not the first time, but this time it felt colder than usual. Marcy felt it the moment she rolled her cleaning cart toward the pet food section. She had done this night shift for 5 years. Nothing scared her, not even the occasional drunk yelling near the checkout. But tonight something in the air pressed down on her chest like invisible hands. Trying to silence her breath, she paused near the bags of dog food and stared at the flickering bulb above. One light blinked twice, then went out completely, and in that moment of half-dark, she saw him, a tall man standing completely still at the far end of the aisle head. Slightly tilted, no cart, no movement, no sound, just stillness like a cutout pasted. In the wrong place of reality, Marcy blinked and looked again. But the man was gone just like that. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She whispered to herself, probably a customer, probably nothing, but she pushed her cart faster than usual past the aisle without cleaning it. She would come back later when more people were around, but deep inside she knew she would not later. While in the break room, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, she mentioned it to Jerome, the security guard. He was in his 50s, always calm, always chewing something, this time gum. He laughed off her worry, but then his smile faded when she said the words, "Aisle 14. He leaned in closer, voice lower than usual. "Did he look at you?" Jerome asked, eyes narrowing. Marcy frowned. "What do you mean, did he look at me?" "No, I don't think so. I mean, I couldn't really see his face." "That's good," Jerome said. "You don't want him to." She thought he was joking, but his expression didn't change. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and showed her a grainy CCTV still from a few weeks ago. A tall figure in the exact same aisle, same posture, same head tilt. Timestamp, 3:17 a.m. Exactly the same time. Marcy had seen him. "We've been seeing him once a week, same time, same place," Jerome said. "He never moves, never speaks. Sometimes he disappears before security can check in person." "Why haven't you called the police?" Marcy asked, breath shaky. "Now we did," Jerome whispered. 3 times they came, once found nothing left, even laughed, but then the cop who came, he quit a week later. Won't return our calls, won't even talk about it. Marcy felt her spine tighten with dread, as if something had crawled into her skin and was watching her from inside. Jerome sighed. "I tried looking into it. There was an accident here back in 2009 before they remodeled this store. Used to be a hardware warehouse. A worker got crushed under a shelving collapse. Aisle 14 was where it happened." Name hit her like cold water. Frank, that was his name. She remembered it now only because her manager once told her not to stack too high over there. Something about structural repairs, never fully fixing the damage. Marcy couldn't sleep the next day. Even in daylight, her apartment felt like it was hiding shadows. She kept seeing the man's still body standing in places he shouldn't be, like her kitchen or hallway. Always gone when she turned fully toward it, but still there in the corners of her eyes. The next night she went back to work with a flashlight tucked into her belt, not trusting the store lights anymore. She tried to stay away from aisle 14, but fate seemed to pull her back. Like a magnet, around 3 a.m., she found herself there again, and the light flickered again, and she froze. Again, he was there again, but this time closer, 10 feet away. She could make out part of his face, or what used to be a face. It was sunken. Gray skin like wax melting down a skull, eyes too deep, too wide, mouth slightly open, like a silent scream preserved in time. Marcy's legs wouldn't move, her mouth open to shout, but her voice cracked into silence. The man raised his hand slowly, one finger pointing directly at her, as if selecting her out of everything that existed in that moment. Then he vanished. Again, just blinked out like a glitch in a broken screen. Her scream came too late, echoing through the empty aisles, drawing Jerome running with his flashlight. He found her sitting on the floor, shaking, flashlight rolling beside her, eyes wide fixed on nothing. She whispered, "He chose me over and over again." As Jerome lifted her up to walk away from the aisle, the store lights all down aisle 14 burst into brightness, then shut off together one by one, like footsteps walking away from them back. In the security room, they replayed the footage. No man, no figure, just Marcy standing there alone, whispering to herself, pointing at nothing. Yet her shadow was not alone. It stretched into a longer shape that did not match her body. It stood beside her tall and still head tilted just like him. This time Jerome did not laugh. He locked the office door behind them and picked up his phone with trembling fingers, saying, "I think it is time we finally call someone who understands things beyond the police." Marcy stared at the screen one more time, her reflection hollow, her voice barely audible. "He looked at me now, didn't he?" And the screen flickered once before turning black, the freezer that whispers. The next night the air felt wrong from the moment Marcy stepped through the automatic doors. The usual hum of fluorescent lights, the distant beeps of scanners and murmurs of tired employees all sounded far away, muffled like she had stepped into a world beneath a thick sheet of glass. She had not slept since the last shift, her eyes heavy, her hands cold, but she refused to call off work. Something inside her kept pulling her back. Like unfinished business, like something waiting for her in the shadows. Jerome was not at his station tonight. The new guard was a young guy named Kyle, cheerful, clueless, bouncing his knee while scrolling through videos on his phone. When Marcy asked about Jerome, he just shrugged. Said Jerome had called out, no explanation. She started her shift in silence, trying to avoid aisle 14 altogether, but Walmart had a strange way of bending around her feet. She pushed her cart toward frozen goods, but the path kept tilting, always leading her back toward the darker corners of the store. She stopped herself near the freezer section near aisle 12 and decided to take a breath. Lean against the cold glass let her heartbeat slow down, but then she heard it, a faint voice, a whisper so soft it sounded like wind blowing across snow. She looked around, no one there. She leaned her head toward the freezer door, and the whisper became clearer. Not words exactly, but sounds like someone was breathing behind the glass, struggling to speak or scream without lips. She stepped back, heart racing, then opened the freezer door, expecting fog and chill, but what came out was warm and sour, like breath, like something had been alive inside the freezer for too long. She dropped the door. It slammed shut, but the whisper did not stop. Instead, it came from the next freezer, then the next, as if something was crawling through them, whispering from one glass box to another. She backed away fast, almost tripping over her cart, and the lights above flickered, just like in aisle 14. She turned to leave, to get to the front to tell someone anything, but as she passed by the security mirror at the corner, she caught her reflection, and she froze. Her body was there, her movement was right, but her reflection was not looking where she looked. It was staring directly behind her eyes, wide mouth stretched in silent horror. She turned fast, but nothing was there, just cold tile and rows of frozen peas. But when she looked back, the reflection was still wrong, still staring past her. She ran to the break room, locked the door behind her, breathing heavy, hands shaking, and sat on the floor beside the lockers, trying to convince herself she was imagining things. Maybe the lack of sleep, maybe stress, maybe the fear from last night still hanging over her. But her phone buzzed, and when she checked it, a message appeared from an unknown number. "You are not imagining anything." She dropped the phone like it had burned her, stared at the screen from a distance, then picked it up slowly, fingers trembling. The message was gone, vanished from the screen, no trace in her inbox, like it had never been sent. Her shift manager, Denise, walked in just then, holding her own phone, eyes looking strange, almost dazed. She said in a flat voice, "Someone left something in aisle 14 for you. You should go look now." Marcy stood there, frozen, throat dry, trying to form words, but Denise turned around and walked out before she could say anything. She did not want to go back, not after what she had seen, what she had felt, but something inside her whispered louder than fear, something that sounded like, "If you do not go now, you may never understand why this is happening." So she walked toward aisle 14, slowly, every step louder than the last, echoing through the quiet store. The lights above the aisle were already flickering when she arrived, and in the center of the aisle, where the man had stood last night, was a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with old string. She picked it up, hands trembling. No name, no label, just one word, written in faded black ink. She opened the box right there, unable to wait, and inside she found something that made her knees buckle. A name tag covered in dried something dark and cracked and old. The tag read Frank. Her name tag, it was her own. but aged, stained as if it had been buried for years. She stared at it, unable to breathe, and then she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, steady, one by one, and then the whisper again, closer now, breathing her name into her ear like a curse. She turned around fast, but the aisle was empty, only the lights flickering above, only the hum of freezer motors. But on the ground, where she had been standing, were new footprints, damp and long, leading away from her and down the aisle into the darkness. And this time she followed them without thinking, because something told her she was not going to survive this unless she understood it. The employee who never left, Marcy, followed the wet footprints down the aisle, her feet moving before her. Thoughts could catch up. The store felt heavier with every step, like the walls were pressing inward, breathing around her, like something alive pretending to be dead. Footprints stopped near the old fire exit door, the one that never opened fully. Since the last renovation, she had never seen anyone use it, not even during drills, yet tonight it stood slightly ajar, creaking softly, as if inviting her into something she could never return from. She hesitated, one hand reaching forward to push it open, when suddenly she heard a sound from behind her, a slow, dragging shuffle, like someone limping toward her from the aisle. She had just walked. She spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing, only the rows of shelves stretching into silence. Yet the sound continued, coming closer, louder, something unseen pulling itself toward her, step by step, breath by breath. Pushed the door and slipped through, entering a narrow corridor, dimly lit with yellow bulbs, some broken wires, exposed walls stained with marks that looked too much like handprints, smeared and reaching. She had never seen this part of the building before, and she worked here for 5 years. The corridor twisted downward, sloping like a tunnel leading into the earth. With each step, the air grew colder, heavier, like water pressing down on her lungs. She kept going, drawn by a feeling she could not name, until she reached a door made of rusted metal, scratched with words that had been carved in desperation. She leaned in closer, reading the faded letters, "Help me," and below that, "Forgive me," and under that her own name, carved freshly, as if made just moments ago. The wood still flaking at the edges. She stepped back, heart slamming against her chest, and the door creaked open by itself, revealing a small room filled with old shelves, dusty boxes, broken mannequins, and in the center a chair with restraints hanging loose, like someone had just left. The air in the room was wrong, thick with silence, too deep, too unnatural. And then she saw him, the man from aisle 14, standing in the far corner, facing the wall, his head slowly turning, not with motion, but as if rewinding time, his body cracking like dry wood, his eyes black pools without light, without end. He lifted his hand and pointed at her again, same as before, but now his mouth moved, not open, not closed, just moving, as if speaking words with no sound. And then she heard it, not with her ears, but inside her head, a voice made of screams layered over whispers. "You were there." She shook her head, backing away, hands raised. "I do not know you. I was not there. I do not understand." But the voice pressed harder into her skull, filling her with images, flashing like lightning shadows, screams, a collapsing shelf, a man trapped beneath metal beams, calling for help and no one coming. And then she remembered the day years ago, when the warehouse still existed, before the remodel. She had worked part-time then, only for a few months. One night she had heard a loud crash, but was told to stay put, that it was just equipment falling. And later she heard that someone had died, but no one had ever said who. Now she saw his face beneath the beams, eyes filled with pain, reaching out, calling out, and she had turned away. Too afraid, too small, too new. She had told herself someone else would help. She had walked away. "You left me," he said again, "and now I cannot leave." She dropped to her knees, shaking, whispering, "I did not know. I did not know. I was just a kid. I did not mean to leave you." Lights flickered and the air trembled, and the man took a step forward, not with threat, but with sorrow, face melting into something human. "Something broken set me free," he said, and then vanished, leaving only the sound of something shattering like a chain breaking. Marcy stood slowly, wiping her face, unsure if she was crying or sweating. She looked around the room, now dim and empty, and at the center of the floor, where the man had stood, was a name tag, rusted and bent, reading Frank, and below it a second one, shiny and new, with her name and the word forgiven scratched faintly into its plastic. She stepped back out into the corridor, now quiet, no longer pressing down on her lungs, and behind her the door closed gently on its own, locking with a soft click when she emerged into the store. The lights were steady, the air normal, and Kyle waved at her casually like nothing had happened, like time had folded around her and stitched itself shut. But in her pocket the two name tags pressed together, warm against her palm, and she knew something had changed, had seen what guilt could become when left to rot in silence, and she had felt what it meant to face the past and survive. But she also knew this store was not finished with her, not yet. The eyes in the ceiling. Marcy stood in the break room, staring at her reflection in the microwave door, the overhead light buzzing above her with an uneven rhythm. Everything looked the same, but felt wrong, like someone had reset the world with small details, twisted just enough to feel unfamiliar. Kyle entered, humming a tune too old for someone his age, tossing a can of soda onto the table. He smiled, but his eyes did not. They looked hollow-wide, like mirrors with no soul behind them. He asked how her night was, but she did not answer. She could not find her voice, not after what she saw, not after what she remembered. The hallway behind him flickered, and for a split second she saw a shadow move across the wall. Not walking, floating like a ripple in the air. He did not react, as if he could not see it, as if he had never seen anything beyond the lights and shelves and cameras. She got up and walked toward the stockroom, telling herself she just needed to breathe, to feel safe, to be around boxes and normal things. But the moment she entered, the scent of dust and decay hit her like a wave, stronger than it should be, like something had been rotting inside the walls for years. The motion sensor lights flicked on, slowly revealing rows of stacked pallets, and then a single balloon tied to a shelf, red and bobbing slightly, as if someone had just let it go. She walked toward it, slowly drawn by something she could not name, and as she got closer she noticed the floor tiles under it were darker, stained in a circular shape, like someone had spilled oil or something thicker. Foot stepped into the stain, and everything went silent. No hum, no buzz, no sound at all. And then the light above popped with a sharp crack, leaving her in shadow. She looked up and saw them, dozens of small eyes blinking open on the ceiling, staring down at her, watching from inside vents and holes and cracks in the plaster. They blinked in unison, slow and cold, and then she heard laughter, soft and cruel, like children playing in a graveyard. A voice echoed from the walls, "You let one die. Now let us love." She ran out of the room, slamming into a shelf on the way, knocking over boxes and spilling toys across the floor. Her hands scraped her knees, bruised. But she did not stop. She ran through the aisles, trying to find another person, another light, another reality. But the store had changed. Every aisle looked the same. Every corner turned her back to the same place again and again, like the building had shifted into a maze with no center. She stopped near the pharmacy, panting, gripping the counter to stay upright, when she saw a mirror behind the counter, not large, just a small one used by staff, and in it she saw herself, but older, bruised, wearing a different shirt, one she had not owned in years, and her reflection whispered one word over and over: run. She turned around and saw nothing, but the lights dimmed and the cold returned, and behind the shelves something moved. A shape crawling on all fours, with limbs too long and joints that bent the wrong way. It did not breathe, it did not growl, it just came toward her, slow and hungry. She backed away, not screaming, not even crying, just shaking as it got closer, and the lights above it blew out one by one, like it was swallowing the light with every step. Then a hand grabbed her from behind, pulling her into the cleaning closet, slamming the door shut and covering her mouth with a rough glove. It was Jerome, his eyes wild, his beard unshaven, his breath fast. "I came back. I knew you were still here. I knew you would not leave," he whispered. She clung to him, unable to speak, and he nodded as if he already understood. "I have seen it too. It is not just ghosts, it is guilt. It is fear. It is every wrong thing we ignore until it takes a shape, until it walks, until it feeds." They waited in silence, breathing slow, listening to the thing crawl by just outside the door, scratching at the wood, snorting like it smelled them. but could not find the door. After a long moment, it moved on, dragging its limbs down the hallway, and the sound faded into the distance. Jerome looked at her and said, "You need to finish what started years ago, or it will keep coming back, not just for you but for everyone who walks these floors." Marcy nodded slowly, her eyes clearer. Now her fear reshaped into something sharper, not courage, but resolve, and behind the silence they both heard the whisper, "Return, not angry this time but pleading, come. Find me the final shift." Marcy stood once again before aisle 14, the lights above her flickering like they always did. But this time she did not flinch, her heartbeat was steady. Her hands no longer shook beside her. Jerome held the old store blueprint he had found in the archive room of the district office. It showed a hidden service elevator that no longer appeared on the modern layout. They followed the directions past the toy section, through a locked supply closet, and down a narrow staircase made of rusted metal where each step echoed like a scream. Trapped in a tunnel at the bottom was a heavy iron door, the kind used in industrial freezers, and on it someone had scratched in red paint the word "Remember." Jerome gripped the handle, but it burned his palm, so Marcy stepped forward and pulled it open. Slowly, inside was cold, too cold for any normal space, and the walls were lined with mirrors from floor to ceiling, each one showing a different version of her, some crying, some running, some screaming, but all of them broken. In the center of the room stood a table with an old first aid kit, and beside it a name tag pinned to a folded shirt, stained and worn. The tag read Frank, but the photo on it had her face, not his. Her own eyes, staring back, hollow and lifeless. Stepped forward and touched the tag, and the mirrors began to shatter one by one, each explosion sounding like a memory breaking free, and the room trembled as a shape began to rise from the shadows. Not Frank, not a ghost, but something made of guilt and pain and silence. It looked like her, it walked like her, it bled like her, but its face was blank, smooth like a mask stretched too tight over something. Screaming beneath it opened its arms wide, and from all around the room, voices poured out, memories and whispers and regrets. Every moment she had chosen to look away, every time she had ignored someone else's pain, every shift she had told herself it was just a job, not her problem, not her fault. Jerome tried to step in, but the door slammed shut behind him, locking him out, and the creature lunged toward Marcy, grabbing her wrists, pulling her close and speaking without sound. "This is what you left behind, this is what you must carry." She closed her eyes, and instead of pulling away, she stepped forward into the thing, wrapped her arms around it, and whispered, "I see you, I hear you, I remember you." Creature stopped trembling, and then it collapsed into her like smoke drawn into her lungs, and she screamed, not in pain, but in release. Every fear, every guilt, every wound pouring out of her like black water. When she opened her eyes again, the room was gone, and she was back in the middle of aisle 14. Lights, steady shelves, normal floor, clean and dry. In her hands was the same name tag, but now the photo was of Frank, and the word "forgiven" was etched beneath it. Jerome appeared beside her, eyes wide, voice shaking. "I do not know what just happened, but everything feels different." She nodded, not speaking, and walked toward the front of the store. The morning sun just beginning to rise outside the glass doors. She stood there watching it for a long time, feeling warmth on her skin for the first time in what felt like years. When she turned back, the store looked smaller. No shadows, no whispers, no flickering lights. Just silence, the kind that brings peace, not fear. She handed the name tag to the new manager, told him to place it on the wall of remembrance, a wall that had not existed until that moment, but now stood near the employee clock and glowing softly like it had always been there. That night she did not return for her shift. She packed her things, left town without telling anyone where she was going. She needed quiet, she needed healing. Years later, the Walmart still stood, but no one spoke of the man in aisle 14. No one saw strange shadows or heard whispers from the freezer section. The store was just a store, nothing more. But on the wall behind the break room, near the time clock, one name tag hung alone, and beneath it the words, "Some ghosts just want to be remembered." The end.